When Andrew finally worked up the nerve to tell his dad he wanted to get married, Victor Thompson just stood there, stunned. His usual confident stare faltered, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an anchor. And for once, the man who always had something to say, had nothing. Victor was used to having control over everything. So hearing this from his son, it wasn't just unexpected, it threw him completely off balance. To Victor, Andrew had always been the golden boy with a silver spoon. A life full of luxury, attention, and zero boundaries. From a young age, Andrew had lived in a world where nothing was off limits and every whim was indulged. And that world? Victor had built it. He'd run a powerhouse of a company, made sure his son never heard the word no. But now that world felt like it was cracking at the seams. Carefree, impulsive Andrew was suddenly talking about commitment. Something real. Something Victor hadn't seen coming. "You're putting me in an impossible position," Victor said slowly, shaking his head. His voice wavered, a mix of disbelief and frustration bleeding through. "Just yesterday I told you I found a great girl for you. Smart, reliable, someone who actually fits our family. And you? You brushed it off like it was nothing. Now, all of a sudden, you're ready to get married? Are you kidding me, Andrew?" He let out a long sigh and braced himself against the heavy oak desk between them. That desk, like the rest of his office, was a monument to his success. To power. To control. And now, that control was slipping through his fingers. He got up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below like he needed to recenter himself. Then he said, as if trying to lock the decision back into place. "Fine. We'll do it your way. Tonight, we'll go meet Alicia and her family. I'll set it all up. She's the right choice, Andrew. You'll see that soon enough." But Andrew didn't budge. He sat up straight, and in his eyes, Victor saw something he didn't recognize, something strong, steady, and serious. Determined. Real. "Dad, we're not going anywhere," Andrew said, his voice calm but solid as a rock. "I'm seeing Mary tonight. I love her. And I'm marrying her. End of story." His words dropped like thunder in the room. Heavy. Final. Victor felt the heat rise to his temples. He turned to face his son, his expression twisting with disbelief and anger. "What did you just say?" he snapped. "Mary? Who the hell is Mary? Where did you even meet her?" "Andrew, I want everything. Her full name, her address. I'll find out exactly what kind of girl you think you're going to marry." His voice broke into a shout, but Andrew didn't say a word. He just shook his head. And that silence, somehow, cut deeper than anything he could have said. It wasn't defiance. It was independence. A quiet strength Victor never expected to see in his son. Andrew stood up, turned, and walked toward the door without looking back. Victor called after him, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and desperation. "Andrew! You come back here, right now." But his son didn't stop. The sharp sound of footsteps on the stairs. A door slamming. The roar of an engine. And then, he was gone. Victor stood frozen in the middle of his office, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. His heart pounded, and a bitter taste filled his mouth. He grit his teeth, trying to choke down the rising anger, and without wasting a second, barked into the intercom. "Follow him," he ordered, barely holding it together. "I want to know everything, where he goes, who he's with, who this Mary is, and what hold she has on him. I don't want a single detail missed." The next day, Victor was parked in the shade of an old neighborhood, sitting silently in his car. His eyes, trained to notice everything, were fixed on his son. Andrew was standing outside an apartment building, animatedly chatting with a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She was simply but neatly dressed, holding a heavy grocery bag in one hand, and in the other, the tiny hand of a little boy who clung to her trustingly. Andrew smiled as he spoke to her. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he took the bag from her. They walked toward the entrance together. And in that one small gesture, so warm, so gentle, Victor felt a sharp stab in his chest. Something between jealousy and pain. A few minutes later, Andrew came back out, got in his car, and drove off. Victor stayed behind, staring blankly through the windshield. His mind was racing. The woman was clearly older than Andrew, anyone could see that. But what shook him even more was the child. The little boy who looked up at Andrew with such complete trust. Victor gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked. His son. The same Andrew he had always dismissed as flighty and unserious, was now part of something Victor couldn't quite wrap his head around. The anger surged again, this time laced with bitter disappointment. "Perfect," Victor muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just perfect." He shut his eyes, trying to collect his thoughts. But all he could see was that image, Andrew carrying the grocery bag, walking beside the woman and her son. It didn't look like the Andrew he thought he knew. Not at all. And right then, Victor was hit with a realization that cut deep: maybe, he never really knew his son at all. The thought sliced through him like a knife. Clenching his jaw, he made a decision. He had to find out the truth, whatever it took. He approached two older women sitting near the entrance and politely asked which floor the woman with the child lived on. They not only told him but gave him the exact apartment number. Thanking them, Victor climbed the stairs and rang the doorbell. And then, she opened the door. It was her, the woman Andrew had just walked in with. Victor had every intention of demanding she stay away from his son. But the moment their eyes met, he froze. He knew that face. It was Mary. Mary, and her older sister Helen, were part of his past. Victor had known them since childhood. His brother Alex had dated Helen for years before marrying her. And Mary? She'd followed Victor around like a shadow back then, always tagging along, always looking up to him. But she was much younger, and he never gave it much thought. Later, Irene came into his life. Irene, the woman he married. The mother of his son. But just before the wedding, Mary had come to him, crying, confessing she was in love with him. Victor had brushed it off as a childish crush. Something fleeting. Something that didn't matter. Irene died when Andrew was only 5 years old. Since then, Victor had raised his son alone. He never thought of Mary again, just as he didn't think of his brother. And that was his fault. One day he found out that he and Alex were only half-brothers on their mother's side. Maybe that's why their mother always pitted the older son more, maybe she didn't love him more, but she was softer with him. Victor felt jealous. He was eaten up by anger. He wanted to prove he was better, more successful, more needed, and he really did achieve everything on his own: career, money, status. But none of it was for himself. He built it all just to prove something to his brother. Once, Alex came to him asking for money to pay for treatment for his newborn son. He was working as a regular mechanic, living very modestly. Victor didn't look into it then, he refused. And a month later, when he accidentally found out how terrible the boy's illness was, he rushed to his brother with the money. But it was already too late. The time had been lost, and the boy couldn't be saved. That day, Helen opened the door wearing a black armband. From inside the house, Victor could hear Alex's sobs. He couldn't bring himself to step over the threshold, and from that day on, he never saw Alex or his wife again. And soon after that, Victor himself became a widower, left with a small son in his arms. And now, after all these years, the past suddenly stood before him in the form of Mary. She raised her beautiful eyebrows in surprise. "Vic, how did you find me? Why? What do you want?" "Mary," he said, confused, "I didn't know. But what about Andrew?" Andrew? What Andrew? My son, you just met with him. You're Andrew's father. Yes. Congratulations, she said quietly. He's a really good guy. But what does that have to do with me? Victor tried to explain, but got lost in his own thoughts and words. It all came out awkward and clumsy. He felt foolish, turned around, and left without even saying goodbye. Mary kept watching him walk away for a long time. For several days, Victor couldn't get himself together. The thought that his son was seeing Mary, who had suddenly stirred something so deep in himself, wouldn't leave his mind. Those few minutes at her door felt like life had rewound. He suddenly realized how, back in his youth, he hadn't seen her beauty, hadn't noticed her. And now he wanted to talk to her about Alex. She was Helen's sister, so she must know everything. Maybe, through her, he could ask his brother for forgiveness. But Victor wasn't sure if Alex even wanted to hear from him. The thoughts kept spinning in his head, giving him no peace. Eventually, all of it led to a serious mistake. Victor completely forgot about an important meeting with investors. And not only was he supposed to be there, he was also responsible for organizing a translator. It was essential. The guests were from South Korea. The car was already pulling up to the office. Victor paced the room in panic, gripping his phone. He tried to call, then gave up and went to greet the guests himself. They exchanged greetings. A pause followed, an awkward one. Something had to be done, some way out of the situation. But Victor, as the host, had no idea what to do. Standing in the spacious lobby of his company, Victor felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He tried to explain to the Korean investors that the translator was delayed, but his words got lost in the language barrier. His gestures, usually confident, now seemed clumsy, and his voice, accustomed to giving orders, trembled with despair. The guests, dressed in formal suits, exchanged glances, their faces hardening. The air grew tense, thick as a storm cloud. Victor caught their hushed whispers. Even though he didn't understand the words, the tone said it all: discontent, disappointment, the threat of walking away. If they turned around and left now, it wouldn't just be a failure, it would be a disaster that could shatter the reputation of his company, one he had built over decades. His heart pounded so loudly it felt like it drowned out everything around him, and only one thought echoed in his head: I can't lose this. Not now. The pressure grew with every second. One of the investors, an older man with deep lines on his forehead, began gathering his papers, casting Victor a look full of cold judgment. Victor tried to smile, but it came out strained, almost painful. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the next wrong step could be the last. And just then, when hope had almost vanished, she appeared in the lobby. A young woman, dressed in a simple janitor's uniform, with a plain gray apron and her hair tied neatly into a ponytail, stepped forward. Her movements were calm, almost weightless, but there was a quiet confidence in them that made everyone stop and stare. She stood before the group, gave a respectful nod, and looking directly into the eyes of the eldest investor, introduced herself. I'm Mary. Her voice, soft but firm, cut through the tense silence like a beam of light in the darkness. And then, to Victor's astonishment, she began to speak in perfect Korean. Her words flowed smoothly, like a melody, and there wasn't the slightest hint of hesitation in them. She repeated everything Victor had tried to say, explained the reason for the interpreter's delay, adding a few polite phrases that made the guests' faces soften. Then she turned to Victor, and her eyes, warm, with a slight sparkle, met his bewildered gaze. I can help, she said simply, but in that simplicity there was so much strength that Victor felt his heart, just frozen with fear, begin to thaw. At that moment, he thought this couldn't be a coincidence. It was a miracle, a gift from above, sent at the most critical moment. Mary, this fragile girl in a janitor's uniform, had become his salvation. The meeting, which seemed doomed to fail, turned into a triumph. Mary translated with ease, her voice sounding firm or gentle depending on the tone of the conversation. She not only conveyed the words, but also the emotions, the nuances that made the communication come alive. The investors, who had been frowning just moments before, began to smile, nod, and ask questions. By the end of the meeting, they were shaking Victor's hand with genuine respect, and the agreement, so important for the company, was signed without a single hitch. When the guests left, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the echo of grateful words, Victor finally exhaled. But his thoughts were no longer on business, they were on her. He invited Mary into his office, still not quite believing what had just happened. She entered, just as calm, with a gentle smile that seemed to hide an entire universe. Victor gestured to the chair across from his desk, but he didn't sit down. He walked around the office, trying to find the words that could express his gratitude. "Now tell me," he began, stopping and looking at her with genuine admiration, "who are you and how did you end up in my company? How is this possible?" Mary slightly shrugged, as if her feat was something ordinary. "I've been working here as a janitor for 2 months now," she answered, and her voice was as warm as her gaze. "I clean the offices, wipe the desks, water the plants. Nothing special." Victor froze, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "A janitor," he repeated, as if not believing his ears. "But why didn't you say you know Korean? That's incredible." Mary smiled wider, and a hint of sadness flickered in her eyes, as if she had remembered something from long ago. "I don't just speak Korean. I also speak English, French, and German. Since childhood, I've had a passion for languages, they're like music to me, a way to understand the world. But no one would hire me as a translator." Victor looked at her, and inside him grew a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, a mix of admiration, respect, and something he couldn't yet name. This girl, modest, almost invisible in her uniform, turned out to be a treasure he had almost missed. "Mary," he said, and his voice trembled with sincerity, "starting today, you are no longer a janitor. You are a translator. And I want you by my side, not just here, but also on business trips. You saved me today. And my company." Mary nodded, her cheeks slightly blushed, but she didn't look away. At that moment, the office door swung open, and Andrew walked in. His gaze, full of surprise, darted from his father to Mary and then back again. He froze, as if trying to process the scene in front of him, and a slow smile spread across his face, a mix of pride and slight embarrassment. "So, you've already met? I hope Dad hasn't said anything stupid yet. I don't get it." Victor slowly shifted his gaze from his son to the girl. "Dad, this is Mary, the one I told you about. My fiancée. And I'm marrying her no matter what you say." Victor froze in confusion, then suddenly smiled. "Andrew, you have no idea how much I approve of your relationship with this girl. Mary is brilliant." He thought for a moment, then asked. "Wait. That woman with the child, her name was also Mary. Is she related to you? I'm completely confused now." "That's my Mary's neighbor. I just helped carry the bags." And then Andrew's fiancée joined the conversation. "You're talking about Mary Parker?" "Yes, we live next door. Our apartments share a wall." Victor froze. In his mind, everything fell into place. He had simply mixed up the apartments. But was it really a coincidence, to see, right there, the very woman who had once been part of his past? He turned to the girl. "Mary, what do you know about your neighbor?" "It's a tragic story," she answered quietly. "Her sister and her husband died in a car accident. Only the son was left. Now Mary is raising him." Andrew and Mary looked after Victor with surprise as he suddenly jumped up and ran out of the office. He was rushing to the place where he could learn the truth. Had he been too late again? Too late, just as bitterly and irreversibly as the first time. And now, once again, he stood before the one he hadn't listened to in the past. Mary, is it true? Alex, Helen, are they gone? Yes, she nodded. How did it happen? Tell me. What is there to tell? They were coming back from work, it was raining. Visibility was bad. They collided with a truck. The doctors said there was no chance. Vinny stayed with me. That's how we live. If only you knew how sorry I am. Don't, she quietly interrupted. What happened wasn't your fault. And now go, Vic. You have your own life, and we have ours. I never thought we'd see each other again. If I had known, I wouldn't have come here. Victor wanted to say something, but Mary had already closed the door in front of him. A week passed. Victor was truly happy for Andrew, who was preparing for the wedding. But deep inside Victor himself, there was a pain that wouldn't let go for even a minute. He came to Mary's place several times, called her, but there was no answer. She didn't open the door, didn't pick up the phone. And yet he didn't give up. He just wanted to see her. One day, coming to the house again, he noticed that the door to her apartment was slightly open. There were doctors inside. Mary had suffered a severe attack. She was urgently hospitalized, and the medics didn't know what to do with the child, who was watching everything in fear, his eyes wide open. When the ambulance drove away, Victor approached the boy. Your name is Vinny? Yes. And I'm Uncle Victor. Hey, how about coming over to my place for a visit? For 2 months, long and full of new discoveries, little Vinny lived at Victor's house. These weeks became a time that changed them both forever. While Mary lay in the hospital, fighting for her health after a difficult surgery, Victor took on the care of the boy whose large, worried eyes on the first day of their meeting had etched themselves into his heart forever. He paid for everything that could ease Mary's path to recovery, a spacious room with windows overlooking a blooming garden, the best medications, attentive doctors, and round-the-clock care. But his care wasn't limited to money. Every evening he called the hospital to find out how she was doing, and every time he heard that she was getting better, he felt warmth spreading in his chest, mixed with hope. Victor found out that Mary had come to the city for a medical checkup, without even suspecting that fate would bring her face to face with him. By an incredible coincidence, she rented an apartment right next to the one where Andrew's fiancée lived. This coincidence, which seemed random at first glance, turned out to be a thread that wove their lives into a single fabric. Victor couldn't stop thinking about how fragile and at the same time powerful fate is, how it brought Mary back into his world after years full of regret and loss. Over those 2 months, Victor and Vinny became something more to each other than just an adult and a child who happened to end up under the same roof. Victor, who was used to strict order and solitude, suddenly discovered how his house was filling with new meaning. Vinny's morning laughter, his curious questions about how machines work, or his timid requests to read before bed, all this awakened in Victor long-forgotten feelings. He taught the boy to ride a bike in the yard. Together they built a wooden birdhouse for the garden, and each such moment was like a breath of air for Victor after a long time underwater. Vinny, in turn, clung to him like to a lighthouse in a storm. His little hands wrapped trustingly around Victor's neck when he tossed him into the air, and his gaze, full of gratitude, spoke louder than any words. For him, Victor was kind, caring, reliable, someone the boy, who had lost so much, could be proud of. When it came time to pick Mary up from the hospital, Victor and Vinny prepared for this day like for a celebration. They picked out a bouquet of pale pink peonies together. Vinny said they looked like clouds, and Victor just wanted the flowers to be as warm as his feelings. In the hospital corridor, Vinny held Victor's hand tightly, bouncing on the spot impatiently, and when Mary finally appeared, her step still weak but confident, Victor's heart began to beat faster. She walked toward them, slightly pale, with a trace of tiredness on her face, but her eyes shone like stars on a clear night. Her smile, so sincere and open, lit up everything around, and Victor felt the last walls he had spent years building around his heart begin to crumble. Mary looked at Vinny, who rushed to her with a joyful scream, and at Victor, whose gaze was full of unspoken words. In that moment, he realized, he had a chance. A chance not just to make up for the past, but to build a future he had never dared to dream of. And he swore to himself that he would do everything not to miss this opportunity. Time passed, and life, as if in reward for their resilience, wove their destinies into one. Mary and Victor got married in a quiet but love-filled ceremony, surrounded only by their closest ones. Their house, once cold and empty, now echoed with the laughter and warmth of a real family. Not long ago, Mary gave Victor twins, a boy and a girl, whose tiny fingers and ringing voices filled their lives with a new light. Vinny, now the older brother, proudly took on the role of caring for the little ones. He fussed over them, patiently rocking them in their cradle or telling them his childhood stories while they stared at him with their big eyes, spellbound. His smile, when he looked at his brother and sister, was a reflection of the love that united them all. Victor, standing by the window and watching Vinny play with the babies in the garden while Mary, laughing, adjusted their little hats, felt his heart overflow with gratitude. He knew that the happiness that had once timidly knocked on their door had now made its home there for good. Every day spent with his family was proof that even after the darkest times, life can bring light, if only one opens their heart to it.